With so many cool heroes in Deadlock to choose from, I'm on a mission to learn them all. I'm going to spend 50 games with each character to discover what they can teach me and how they can help me become a better player. Afterwards, I'll discuss my findings on things like builds, positioning, playstyle, and of course fun, all for the love of learning. So today, let's talk about Abrams. In my opinion, character design in Deadlock is absolutely incredible and is the cornerstone of the entire game. Every hero has such a distinct, unique identity, which comes with well-defined strengths and weaknesses that make them who they are. While I do think that roles are a rather free-flowing idea in Deadlock, to me those strengths and weaknesses are what naturally direct heroes to certain playstyles, and it's been my connection to heroes that's defined my own style. What excites me about this series is that each hero comes with their own unique lessons, and regardless of if they resonate with me or not, my learnings will strengthen my play and teach me about my personal style. Whether a hero feels great and reaffirms my strengths or feels challenging and exposes my weaknesses, they're all pieces of a larger puzzle that work towards the big picture of developing me as a player. Now I mention this because while I found him fun at times, Abrams just isn't quite for me. But in going outside of my comfort zone to play him, I have learned a lot of important lessons. With the characters I've connected to thus far, I've learned that I like high mobility, versatile heroes, and I have a bit of a habit of leaning more defensively, taking range where I can. Abrams' style is in every way the opposite, being a straightforward, close quarters aggressive hero, and as a result, I had to completely change my approach with him. While I do think that Abrams is mechanically easy, in needing to adapt so much of my playstyle, I ended up finding him more strategically challenging than I had expected. In a lot of ways, my time with Abrams wasn't so much about his difficulty, but rather the difficulty of challenging my own bad habits and overcoming my weaknesses. I've developed a lot of strengths in certain areas of the game, but in relying too much on those strengths alone, they can occasionally become crutches, which can stifle my adaptability. That's not to say that finding comfort isn't a good thing, because it is. I just also think it's important for myself to not be complacent, and Abrams was the perfect hero to challenge my comfort. Just as I think there's things to learn from losses, there's things to gain from playing heroes I'm not particularly good at, and I think Abrams represents why. It took a lot for me to find my footing with him, and in the end it's clear he's not my cup of tea, but in doing away with my sense of comfort, I step away from my time with him a much stronger player. I can't win every game and I can't resonate with every hero, but I can do my best to learn along the way and use those lessons to keep moving forward. So if you're unfamiliar with Abrams, here's a quick rundown on his kit. His one is called Siphon Life, where Abrams opens his book, dealing spirit damage over time in a radius, which heals him for a portion of its damage. While Siphon deals the same amount of damage to heroes and non-heroes, it does have different lifesteal amounts, currently being 70% on heroes and 35% on minions. This does all stack, however, so if you find yourself in a crowd, Siphon can deal a lot of damage to several targets and provide a bunch of sustain while doing so. When leveled, it gains reduced cooldown, increased duration, and at max, it gains increased radius, DPS, and scaling. Abrams' 2 is called Shoulder Charge, where he rushes forward, grabbing an enemy he hits along its path. If you charge into a wall with an enemy, you'll stun them when you contact the wall, but if you don't hit anything, you just drop them at the end of the duration. The damage is applied when you make contact with the hero, and the stun is applied when you contact the wall. But interestingly, you can actually use a Dispel magic while being charged to force a drop, which I wasn't aware of. When upgraded, the charge applies a slow, increases the wall stun duration, which is long enough to guarantee a heavy melee, and at max it gains reduced cooldown and increased weapon damage when you hit a hero. Abrams' 3 is called Infernal Resilience, which is a passive ability that regenerates a portion of damage taken over time. At base, 13% of any damage received will be healed over a 20-second period, and since this does occur during combat, although it doesn't technically reduce the damage Abrams takes, it does make him harder to kill through consistent sustain. When leveled, it grants Abrams an extra 200 health, 18% melee lifesteal, and at max it provides 20% debuff resist as well as getting an extra 8% damage regen for a total of 21%. Finally, Abrams' 4 is called Seismic Impact, where he rises into the air before slamming down to the ground, dealing spirit damage in a radius and stunning enemies. While this ability mostly just does what it says on the tin, it can actually pull enemies down to the ground during its trajectory, which is great for picking a Vindicta out of the sky or stuffing something like a 7 ult. When upgraded, it gains reduced cooldown, increased stun duration, and at max it gets increased radius, as well as getting 6 seconds of unstoppable on cast. Overall, I think Abrams' kit is very straightforward, and while there are some nuances in things like his stun durations or when to heavy melee, I think he's pretty easy to pilot. With his passive granting him a bunch of baked-in sustain and Siphon Life giving him even more that's active, there's a pretty fair amount of room for Abrams to take a lot of damage or make mistakes, and of course it sees him shining as a frontliner. Paired alongside the stun from both his charge and ult, Abrams can offer a lot of utility to his team, whether it's in soaking up abilities, distracting in a fight, or canceling ults. Interestingly though, while I say that his kit is simple and he's easy to pilot, in being so unfamiliar with how I would play as a frontliner, I initially misunderstood Abrams. Looking over his abilities and throwing together my first rough build, what stood out to me was his sustain and spirit options, specifically Siphon Life. On paper, it struck me as the ability I could use as my primary damage source and the centerpiece of my builds, but in the end that just didn't quite work for me. As I got a few games under my belt and actually felt out Abrams' playstyle, it was obvious that charges played a much larger role than I had expected, and that I would need to change my approach. As I played more games, tried new items, and attempted different plays, I started to get a clearer picture of where Abrams had his impact and where I would need to invest myself. I'd say that the very strong majority of my impact on Abrams came from charges, and while the actual mechanical loop of looking for charges is easy, using them strategically was more challenging. Although charges are essentially free damage tickets once you have 2 points into them, using them specifically to displace enemies is where I actually found most of my success. Early on, I tried to focus on simply stunning enemies in a good spot so that I could either kill them myself or I could give a nearby teammate an opening to take them down. In a team fight, I was just trying to do my best to position in the center of everything so I could hover near targets with ults I could cancel and try to set up some basic assists. As I got used to the distance that I could drag enemies as well as how maneuverable I could be in a charge, I realized how impactful not just the stun was, but that displacement. I could hide in a veil and drag enemies into a tower, I could cut off an escaping enemy and bring them back to my team, or I could remove an enemy from a fight and force them into a 1v1 away from their help. The more comfortable I got with Abrams, the more ideas I had for charges, and the better my positioning became to make them happen. Although I did end up placing a lot of my focus on charges and displacement, Abrams' sustain was still a central part of that game plan, and anytime I wasn't actively looking for a pin, it was really the star of the show. With how much healing Abrams can maintain during a fight with Siphon Life and Infernal Resilience, he's able to shrug off a lot more damage than most characters, and similar to Charge, that brings with it some strategic advantages. Not only did it play really well into how I liked to build Abrams, which we'll discuss later in the video, it also meant that I could continue to enable my team between charges, primarily through soaking up abilities and creating space. Anytime I wasn't actively dealing damage or setting up an assist, I was just trying to absorb as much of the enemy's damage output as I could so that my team didn't have to and they'd have breathing room to operate. It did take me quite a while to realize that it wasn't so much about me dealing damage as it was trying to negate enemy damage, but once that clicked for me, I felt like I was off to the races. Combining my strategies for charges with my strategies for tanking damage, I could adapt throughout my games to form a game plan by mixing and matching my approaches. So, for example, maybe there was a beefy Wraith on the enemy team who I knew was going to show up to a fight with a lot of cards. I could try to rush her at the start of the fight, charge her away from the team, and absorb as many of those cards as I could. If I could survive and make it back to the fight, I could probably regen a good amount of health from Siphon Life, and Wraith would be coming back to the fight having lost a portion of her stocked up damage. Maybe while I was distracting the Wraith, my team would be able to get a kill in the scramble, and by the time I got back, we would also have a man advantage. If I didn't need to remove someone from the fight, I could always just try to stay in the thick of things and try to cancel any big ults from someone like a Haze, Seven, or Dynamo. If I knew those heroes would be holding on to their ults until I was dealt with, I would focus my charges on them early so I could try to either take them out of the fight or get a pick on them early. Maybe in lane, if enemies were diving tower to parry a lot, I could bait them into thinking I was late from a box run, sneak in from behind, and charge them into tower so they got smacked. Similarly, if I knew someone was spending a lot of time split pushing, I could find a good corner to hang around so I could pull them under a walker stomp and give them the hands. While mechanically there wasn't much to these strategies outside of just landing charges, I found the importance of Abrams' positioning something really interesting to work with and extremely satisfying when it panned out. Of course, there is more nuance to Abrams outside of just looking for charges and absorbing damage, but that's really where I found the vast majority of my success. That's likely the largest lesson that I took from Abrams, which was in a sense boiling down his kit to its central, most consistent element and doing my best to maximize its impact. While his sustain is really great and his damage output can be solid, what made the difference for me was focusing on the guaranteed impact I could find through charge. If I positioned properly to set up charges, I could take advantage of the stuns to cancel ults, net picks, or peel teammates, and on top of that, it would guarantee me a heavy melee afterwards, which I could build into for consistent damage. Building around sustain as well meant I could survive long enough in a fight to get multiple charges off, and every ability or bullet I tanked in between meant more health for my teammates and more room for them to execute their own plans. It may not have been the most thrilling approach, but knowing exactly what my job was in every engagement made it very easy to do and very consistent to find value in. Looking back on my time with Abrams, while I don't think I'm particularly great at him or that his style is quite for me, I do think I was able to get a good understanding of his strengths and develop my perspective on frontlining. Prior to this episode, frontlining was definitely where I felt weakest as I just didn't have much experience with it, but Abrams was a great start for me to develop my foundations for the playstyle. When it came to building Abrams, I found that he had a lot of versatility in the items he likes, and it would entirely depend on what type of team I was up against. Mostly, I would say the largest factor would be if a team was more spirit or gun heavy, but I would also have to take into consideration how mobile a team was, what kind of ults they had on deck, and just how much sustain I might need to do my job. In terms of my AP order, while it would also vary, I generally found that starting with my passive in lane was the most consistent option, but again, against a more dive heavy duo, I might start with a charge to get an early pin under tower. I like to start off with 1 point in my passive for the health, 2 points into charge to get my heavy melees, then 1 point into siphon and ult for the cooldown. Afterwards, I would probably put another point into siphon for the duration before I maxed charge. Depending on the game, I'd max passive next if I needed the debuff resist, or siphon if I just wanted some extra spirit damage. In terms of items, I like to start lane with some smaller options before I went for my spikes, being extra regen and melee lifesteal to be more tanky, close quarters for gun and melee damage, and spirit strike for the shred. Afterwards, since I like to put my points into charge first, I would go for my gun spike with melee charge and point blank so I could hit as hard as possible after the charge, but also so I can get the slow from point blank. For my spirit spike, I kept things pretty simple with arcane surge for the stamina and range on siphon life, as well as upgrading to spirit snatch to up my melee damage and get some extra spirit shred. Next up was my green spike, which depending on the game I might get before my spirit spike, with life strike to pair alongside the melee lifesteal from my passive and healing booster to buff all of my sustain. With the spikes sorted, I like to grab improved spirit to scale my spirit snatch and siphon life before I would work on getting big ticket items depending on what I was up against. An item I think is fantastic on Abrams when playing into a spirit-heavy team is Scourge, as it not only deals a good amount of percent base damage, but it also provides 40% spirit resist while active. Since I was usually in pretty close range from charges and to work around siphon life, Scourge fit right in, and it's an item I bought almost every game. Second to Scourge for spirit teams was Witchmail, which is a bit of a luxury item, but I do think it's a great choice. The passive bonuses are incredible, providing both spirit resist and spirit power, and with the cooldown reduction, I felt like I just couldn't go wrong with more charges on top of some great stats. Crushing Fist is another great item on Abrams, not only to get some extra melee damage, but also for the reload it provides on melees. Depending on how you pace things in a fight and how often you can sneak in a light melee, it's pretty easy to stay stocked up on ammo, and every time you land a pin in a heavy melee, you'll be fully reloaded. The stun was a bit more of a rare use case for me, but in the situations where it would activate, it would often be the last nail in the coffin. Another item I loved was Inhibitor, which may seem like an odd fit, but it does proc off of melee damage, making it really easy to both activate and maintain with Abrams. A heavy melee applies half of the debuff, and landing all pellets from a shot will also apply half. So if I landed a charge, hit a heavy melee, and put a shot center mass, I could often immediately apply Inhib every time I pin someone. Inhib is great in general, since the 30% damage reduction and 40% healing reduction is a huge debuff, but specifically in the case of Abrams, it's amazing for those moments when I would displace someone outside of a fight and force a 1v1. I'd be right in someone's face, base, potentially with 4,000 plus health, having just knocked off a good chunk of their HP with a heavy melee, and I'd also have just debuffed them with inhib. It won me a lot of fights I otherwise wouldn't have, and is an item I highly recommend trying out on Abrams. Finally, my favorite part of building Abrams was specifically playing into gun-heavy teams with the combo of Juggernaut and plated armor. With Abrams essentially being a mile-wide billboard that says shoot me, using Jug to turn that back onto enemies feels amazing. By keeping the pressure up on those gun heroes, they're forced to fight back or just get pummeled, and Jug not only makes it easier to take them down, but also helps your teammates if that gun hero tries to change targets. With plated on top, it makes it substantially harder for gun heroes to kill Abrams, and if you throw return fire in there as well, it's pretty much not worth it for them to even shoot you. Overall, I really like and admire Abrams as a character, and although I don't think he's the hero for me, I had a lot of fun pushing myself outside my comfort zone to play him. His simplicity is in some ways a downside, but it's also a positive as it gives him an incredible sense of focus within his kit, which makes his job very clear and easy to work around. However, regardless of how simple I feel he is, there's a lot of strategy involved in making that simplicity impactful, which provided a very unique challenge for me. Abrams was also really fun to build around, as he has a surprising amount of versatility, and the strengths of his kit are what makes his game plan function, so items are just the cherry on top, which opens up a lot of flexibility. Sure, in the end, Abrams may not technically be doing a whole lot, but what he does well, and it's hard to ask for more than that. While I'm unsure I'll return to Abrams in the future, he has taught me an important lesson on finding focus within a character, and as always, I'm excited to see how I can take that into future heroes. Each episode, you the viewer have a chance to vote on which hero I'll be playing next for the series. The way it works is I take the 3 top voted heroes in the YouTube comments, and 1 week later I hold the final vote over on Twitch. So if you want your favorite hero to have a horse in the race, make sure you comment them below, and if you want a say on the winner, make sure you come by the stream next Saturday, which is August 22nd. This time around, Silver was our winner, so I'll be starting her games the day this video goes live. I'm live every day but Thursdays starting at 5 p.m. Eastern over at twitch.tv/callmekimbo_. So if you're interested in seeing my learning process live, or you have any questions for me, I'd love to have you by. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments what you think of Abrams and what other heroes you might like to see me learn for the series. I've also put the build ID in the description for my Abrams build if you're looking for a place to start, and you can subscribe to the channel to keep an eye out for more videos soon.